Great. So thank you so much for rejoining us here, and to those of you who are just joining us online, welcome. So I have the great honor of moderating our next panel, which is entitled Refugee Resettlement, Successes and Challenges in the Past. So as we discussed this morning, right, we will be sort of thinking about the future at lunch and right, moving forward from there. But for now, I'd like to sort of highlight, well, what is the experience of resettlement and what does that look like? And so we have four panelists joining us today. So at my farthest right is Han Bui, and Han Bui is the co-chair of the Equity and Inclusion team at Mid-Atlantic SCBWIS. She's also a children's author. Next to her, we have Jawad H., who is the executive director of No Lost Generation at George Mason University. He is an undergraduate student here at George Mason University as well. And next, we have Kim LeBlanc. Kim LeBlanc is the Director of Resettlement and Integration at Lutheran Social Services National Capital Area. And Salima Shamsuddin is the Director of Resettlement and Integration at Lutheran Social Services in the National Capital Area as well, right? So I believe, Kim, you work in Fairfax, and Salima, you work in Woodbridge. Great. And so what we're going to be doing, right, we had sort of an overview of policy and data, and so now we'd really like to hear from folks on the ground, right? So Han and Bui have refugee experiences themselves, and Kim and Salima are working sort of on the ground with people as they arrive, right, and sort of thinking about that behind the scenes aspect of what goes into the resettlement process. And so to start us off, I'd like to open it up, and starting maybe with Jawad or Han, and then moving to Kim and Salima, right? Could you share a bit about either your observations or your lived experiences of displacement and resettlement?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, for organizing this, and thanks to the Institute of Immigration Research team for inviting me. I run a student organization that primarily focuses on connecting refugee background students to higher education opportunities. So most of my observations and experiences focuses on college-aged refugees, young adults, and the challenges that they have faced. And the refugees who are outside of the US and the refugees who have already been resettled in the US, the students share some similar experiences and challenges, but also there are unique challenges that are different depending on where they're currently residing. So, for example, for students outside of the country, the challenges begin from the moment they want to apply for admission, because they see academic pathways as an alternative to resettlement. Michelle, you mentioned that resettlement can take a very long time, so they often search for other visas, such as student visas. But in order to be able to come to an American university, for example, they need to go through the American system and navigate the American higher education. For example, the college applications have not really been designed for international students, and doesn't take into account the documents or the expertise that some of those refugee students need to navigate it. For example, things as simple as asking for a letter of recommendation from a teacher, right? Their teachers might not be able to speak in English and provide that letter of recommendation. They not be able to navigate the Common App and upload those documents. They might not have an official school email address that's going to be acceptable by universities. It might be a private email address like a Gmail or a Yahoo. But even if they can navigate the admission challenges, then the next problem is funding. Refugees don't generally have access to a lot of student loans. They don't qualify for a lot of scholarships because of their residency status. And they get charged international or out-of-state rates if they're not currently in America. and it makes it really expensive to come here. But just imagine if there's a super smart refugee out there who manages to get into a top university and can secure a full ride, full scholarship to cover the cost of attendance, then the next problem emerges that how to reach US. Visa is a huge problem. Students, international students have to prove that they intend to return back to their home countries. I know there has been some progress made on that front, but still securing that visa is really difficult. I have seen students who have managed to get admissions, secure full funding, but still fail to obtain a US visa. And even if by some miracle they can get that visa, then some of them have problem leaving their countries of asylum because they don't have passports, they don't have travel documents, and they cannot return back to their home countries to get those documents because they have fled persecution. But then on the other side, for refugees who are in the US, there are more resources. For example, they can qualify for federal student financial aid and rely on networks of volunteers or refugee resettlement agencies to help them navigate the higher education process. But every once in a while, catch-22 problems arise that nobody really has a solution for. One problem that we come across very often is that refugees qualify for student loans, federal student loans, that often have better terms compared to private loans. And refugees want to take advantage of those, but FAFSA requires a reference with a US address who has known that refugee for 3 years. And that a refugee who has just arrived in the country hasn't had the time to get to know somebody who has known them for 3 years. And again, the problem is not their eligibility for those benefits, but making those benefits accessible because they're already eligible for it. So those are some of the challenges that I've come across.
Great, thank you, Jawad. Han, could you share a little bit about your experience of displacement and resettlement?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Jim, for inviting me. I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity to represent the experiences of refugees, and it was something I lived through, and my family and I came through Guam, the island of Guam, as part of Operation New Life. My family and I left Vietnam on April 30th, 1975. I was 8 years old, and we were rescued at sea by the US Navy and brought through the island of Guam. And we were part of Operation New Life, and that is the resettlement program name for that, what happened at Fort Indiantown Gap. And that Fort Indiantown Gap was the next step. So we went from Guam to Fort Indiantown Gap, and that was in Pennsylvania. And we were there for 6 months. It took my family a really long time to be sponsored because we had a family of 12. And it took a really long time for an organization to feel comfortable taking on that big of a responsibility. We were actually sponsored by a Lutheran church. So I was really moved by sitting next to the director. But we were sponsored by a Lutheran church in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster. And if that hadn't happened, my family and I would have been separated because I was actually going to be put up for adoption because our family was so large, but we had a social worker assigned to help us. And the social worker really advocated for us and went and visited all the organizations to try to get sponsorship for my entire family. And when they heard what was gonna happen, they sponsored my entire family, and we started our life in Lancaster on Plum Street. They gave us housing, and also, so actually when Michelle was speaking, I felt like she was really sharing a lot of my experiences, but some of it is different than what happened in 1975. But I remember just the excitement of being chosen to be sponsored and be able to move into our first home. And we were provided medical care. And like she said, mostly it was for children. So my grandparents were really careful about not having cavities. We had so many. So I remember being really scared to go to the dentist, but I was grateful that we were able to have the services that we needed. We also had people helping us from the church to go to school. And my grandfather was given a job through the church. And they gave, so the criteria was that they needed to provide my family with housing and transportation for my grandfather to go to and from school, from work, and then for us to also be able to go to school. And my grandfather was actually a lieutenant colonel in Vietnam, but when he came to this country, he worked as a maintenance worker, and he did that for over 15 years and did that to provide for our family. So the first generation, my grandfathers, we couldn't afford to have our own housing, but all of us actually have graduated from college. All of my grandfather's children have graduated from college, and all of the grandchildren. And that's part of why I wanted to be here, was to be able to represent positive experiences of immigration and refugee experiences, because we were helped, and I grew up to become a helper. And that's why I write children's books. I write children's books that are inspired by my Vietnamese heritage and my refugee experiences, to show children a different narrative than what they're seeing now.
Great, thank you, Han. I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about your experience, right, which is in many ways very different than the norm. But
Yes.
right, the benefits of sponsorship, I think, right, really fits in well with the model that that we're thinking about today, right, of thinking about the Welcome Corps and sort of the benefits and the possibilities and the potential that sort of support over a longer term period offered you and your family. So
Yes,
it's
my
great to hear.
family was helped for over 10 years. So the church, like you said about establishing relationships, we had a relationship with the church, and they helped my family for over 10 years. And you also mentioned about being self-sufficient. That was such a big goal for my grandfather. We were provided welfare, but we were only on welfare for several months. And my grandfather worked, and all of the older children went to work, and we got off welfare as soon as we could. And my grandfather really instilled in us that importance of work ethic, and that really stayed with all of us. So
Great, thank you. Kim, could you share a little bit about your observations of
Sure.
displacement and resettlement?
First, I want to say I'm honored to be on the stage with these two. Their experiences, they bring so much wealth and knowledge based on their lived experiences. I work with individuals that arrive from all over the world, right now primarily Afghanistan. There's so much in resettlement. I consider it God's work. It really is God's work. We are truly helping people. We are truly saving people's lives. We are truly helping them begin their life in this country. We see the emotional ebb and flow that our staff, or that our clients have. A lot of our clients, the initial arrival, so excited, so happy to be here, so happy to be starting over. And then things start to slow down a little bit. People start to reality hits, right? We have bills to pay, we have this to do, we have to work right away. You might not be able to have the job that you had overseas. You might not be doing a job that you even thought you'd ever do, but we have to start somewhere. So something that resettlement agencies try to work on really hard is to build trust between the staff and the clients. We try to make sure that clients understand that we are here to help them. We try to help them understand that, yes, the first year in resettlement is going to be the hardest year that you'll probably experience in the United States, maybe a couple more years after that. But once you get your foot on solid ground, once we teach you and show you how to navigate through the systems that the United States has and uses for everything, that's our goal. And we just want to do our best to make sure that we are providing the support that individuals need, that we're fostering the relationships that these families need with our agencies. There are some clients that I served 10 years ago that I am still friends with today. Friends with them on Facebook. I've seen their families grow. I've seen them purchase houses. I've seen them get married. I've seen all sorts of just up and up. And that's why I enjoy this type of work. I enjoy, when I first started working in resettlement in North Carolina and Greensboro, we had a really good public transportation system. And a lot of times you'll receive clients that are afraid, that they're afraid they don't know how to navigate systems. They don't know how to get to places. You often have to remind them, you've made it through all of this, and now you're in a safe place, and you can do it. But the most rewarding thing for me when I first got into resettlement was seeing my clients manage to get from their homes to our office without any of our assistance. And that small little bit of hope is a great launching pad to give to our clients, to continue to strive and to continue to thrive. And that's what a lot of resettlement agencies focus on, is the actual thriving of our clients. Not just making sure they have all of their services, but making sure that they can thrive, that they are able to support themselves, that they have, they can call to make doctor's appointments, mental health services, education services. That is our goal.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. Salima, what else would you add?
Yeah, just as Kim said, I think, it's a phase that we talk about in resettlement, where they're so happy they're in this honeymoon phase of being here, and then reality hits, and there's a sense of relief that they're safe, but then also a lot of new challenges arise. And we've seen that. I've worked in Texas for the last 8 years in refugee resettlement, and that was one of the largest states where all of those challenges occurred, but housing wasn't as big of a challenge as it is now in Virginia, where rent for large families could be around $3,000. And how is that sustainable if we put a family in a apartment that is $3,000 a month, and then we're asking them after 3 months to actually be able to afford that, and thinking about the language barriers and all of the challenges. And so just navigating all of that is difficult, but it's also really rewarding to see these experiences and the success that's been happened. Success stories are what makes us keep going. And I think so many of our clients, after that 1 to 2 year mark, we see successful integration, and that's really great.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of which we've sort of already merged into thinking about this. But if you had to think about what would be the greatest strength of the refugee resettlement program to date, and what would be the greatest shortcoming of the refugee resettlement? So if each one of us can take a moment and think about one, and maybe we'll do strengths first, and then let's do shortcomings first, and then we'll do strengths. Okay. So what would be a shortcoming that, right, based on your experience, you would really highlight?
I think the biggest shortcoming for me, as far as what I've seen, is family separation. That was really hard for me when it was very triggering to learn that these families were being separated, because I thought about how hard the social worker fought to keep my family together, and we were treated with kindness at the refugee camp. And I can't even imagine being taken away from my family when I'm not even speaking the language. And so it would have been very scary for me. And so when I thought about that, it was really hard for me to think about the kids and families that it was happening to today. I think that was probably the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, right, I know, right, even we think about nuclear family, right, is usually how US policy defines family. And so you have a very unique case, but even I think for families that are resettled in the United States, right, that means their grandmother or grandfather is still somewhere else, or their cousin, right? And oftentimes those boundaries of family are not the same as they are in the United States. And so that family separation, I think, happens on a broad scale across, right, extended family as well. What other shortcomings come to mind?
I would say I worked overseas, and I just think the intense vetting process, the waiting time. I have served clients where, the mother was in a refugee camp for 17 years in Dadaab, and there's a lot of trauma that happens in those 17 years of waiting. And now I know, with the fall of Kabul, the waiting time wasn't as much. We were able to get a lot of the Afghans in quicker, but definitely just the amount of time that they are just waiting in camps or waiting for their security clearance. I know other countries maybe have some faster, so I would just say that is definitely a shortcoming that I see, but they're improving.
I would say the cost of everything in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm middle class and I still struggle. So imagine coming to a country where you don't speak the language, you don't have the education, or maybe you do, but you might not speak the language, or maybe you do too, but you're starting over. And things, like Salima was saying, you have a family of 8 or 9 or 10, mom, dad, and 8 kids under the age of 17 who need to be in school. How are they going to support themselves living in a house that's $3,000 a month? I guess daily life in the United States would be something that I would say is a huge challenge for us. It's a huge challenge for anybody that lives here, really. But I would say that's our main challenge.
I would say, at least under the traditional resettlement model, one big shortcoming is in terms of building capacity and responding to emergencies. Michelle, you mentioned that there is a presidential determination that's made annually, and it takes into account the capacity of the United States, but also the realities of international politics and conflicts and emergencies around the world. Sometimes that number can be tens of thousands, sometimes it's in the lower brackets. And under the traditional model, the government really relies on resettlement agencies to respond, right? But you can't expect refugee resettlement agencies to hire staff and train them that quickly. And then when there's not enough refugees coming in to lay off those staff, it takes a really long time. And I think the experience of COVID really exposed some of those shortcomings. And it's the traditional resettlement model is still very important, but it needs to be complemented by new models like the Welcome Corps, for example.
I'd like to add that you're absolutely right. It depends on also the political climate in this country. When the fall of Kabul happened, the resettlement offices were rebuilding and really did not have enough time to put together teams because this crisis happened. This work is hard work. It's wonderful work. Like I said, it's God's work, but it is hard work. There is no day that is the exact same. There is nothing there's no there's patterns, but there's no, every day literally is different. Every situation, every family, everything you can think of is different per case. And we have to treat them as such. But when you have a system that's knocked down by the political climate, and then have to quickly rebuild, and then have such an emergency, and people coming, thousands and thousands of people coming with not a lot of documentation, going through the camps and not having all of their documentation that we would normally have resettling refugees, that took a lot. That was a huge toll on resettlement agencies. So capacity is a big issue with resettlement, maintaining staff, because the work is so hard and daunting. It's rewarding as heck, but it is daunting work. Maintaining staff is a problem as well.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to encourage us to think about what are some of the strengths of the current program as well, right? What are we doing well?
I think what we're doing well is like what we're doing today, as far as showing representation and encouraging awareness. I think that's really important because for me, I think for my family to be successful, we had a lot of community involvement. So I feel like having your community come together to help you, that's really, so I really want to celebrate allyship and helpers, because I really believe that was the secret to our success as a family, because we felt supported. We also wanted to rise up to that. We wanted to be what everyone believed we could be. And so I think it's really important to have positive representation, and also to counter some of the fears that people have about refugees and immigrants by showing them who we are. And that's why it's important to have these conversations.
Thank you, Han.
So this can be both a strength or a shortcoming, depending on your perspective. The Refugee Act was passed in 1980, and it's an old provision. It needs to be updated. There's a need for new tools and new mechanisms. But at the same time, it was passed during a period when there was not so much partisan divide, right? The 1980 Refugee Act passed in the Senate with a vote of 85-0. And it is, and because it was passed with such a bipartisan support, still it has managed to endure throughout all these years. Compared to a lot of other immigration provisions, there's sometimes less pressure on the refugee admission program. But also, I want to second what Han said. the refugee admission program in the US really relies on the spirit of public service and volunteerism of the American communities. And I think that's why it has managed to survive all these years. And that's one of the very unique tools that we have in America that a lot of other countries don't enjoy, that local support. Thank you.
I'd agree with that. Local resettlement agencies, I feel, have identified the needs locally and have brought in other organizations, other stakeholders, other service providers to fill in the gaps. The program, the reception and placement program, is very specified in the services that are provided, but then the resettlement agencies, I mean, we have the ORR services, the Office of Refugee Resettlement Services, which provide like the employment services and the intensive case management. But the fact that local resettlement agencies are seeing the need within the community and reaching out to community partners and creating a unified, or a relationship, a unified front. I mean, these are our community members that we're welcoming. We want to have healthy, successful, mentally healthy, physically healthy, thriving members of our community. So it's in our best interest for all of us to come together to work on how we can support and provide wraparound services for everyone.
I think one of the strengths that I see is the diversity that it brings in, having so many people resettled from different countries. It really adds to our society, and it is a melting pot in the US. And then also the numbers that we're seeing, coming in, which is great. I think the US was really fast to respond when Kabul happened and we admitted thousands of Afghans. So just the response time and the amount that we're seeing now as far as coming in of arrivals.
That's great. It's really great to see sort of the theme, right, across the panel, right, about diversity, but also about local support. And I think for those of us here in Northern Virginia, right, that's something that we see happening, right? There's initiatives across the state to set up a database, right, that would allow people to access, right, information about where they can get the services they need, right? And I think George Mason University is particularly well situated, right? We have even, right, Jawad and Ramel are working, right, very much to support refugee students on campus, right, to bring more refugee students to the campus, right? Crystal at the School of Business is working with Lutheran Social Services to, right, give refugees in the area skills to become entrepreneurs, right? And so we see that collaboration, and I think there's a lot, by coming together in spaces like this, we really have the opportunity to do more together, right? And to be that community that is so important for people as they arrive. With that, I'd like to open the floor to questions, if we can get our microphones. I did have a request, if you are asking a question, if you could introduce yourself. So, right, your name, your affiliation. I think that will be really helpful for the people in the room, but also for people who are joining us online to have some context for.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to the event. My name is Umida Hashimova. I'm a graduate student here. Actually, I was thinking, I mean, as a social scientist, I kind of wanted to kind of back and look at some information, particularly for the Lutheran services. I looked at the data, 80s, and then what's the religious attainment of the Americans overall. Like I look at the 1980 and I'm looking at now. I'm just interested, like it was the fall of the people who call themselves religious falling, and then people who calling themselves not religious kind of rising. Does it affect your work? I mean, do you have kind of issues, challenges with reaching out to your people, or is it more separate? I'm just really interested, like a backdoor. How do you have kind of challenges with all this, or is it not tied at all? Because sometimes it's just called one thing and it's not it's not really tied into any your like parishers or people who come affiliated with your church. So I'm just wondering if that's also part of the challenge, or it's not an issue at all for your work.
I don't think it's an issue, really. I just want to make sure I understand the question, because we have like a Lutheran social service, like a Christian name. Is that what you're asking?
A Lutheran name, is that?
Yeah, but overall, like
Like when we reach out to community partners to have like collaboration. Oh yeah,
we reach
that's
out to
never,
everybody.
yes, that's
Yeah.
never a challenge that Lutheran is part of the name. No, and we serve all, we serve Muslims, we serve Christians.
Serve everybody.
Yes,
If you're a
and
refugee and eligible to come to the United States, you're eligible to come to our office, just about. I've worked for Church World Service, and they have the name church in their name. I've worked for Ethiopian Community Development Council, they have Ethiopian. And I've heard clients before say, do they only serve Ethiopian people? I'm not Christian, can I be served by a Church World Service? And yes, absolutely. Just because we have a religious title, we are not religious bound. We do work, Lutheran Social Services, our offices do work with different parishes, Lutheran churches in the community. We a lot of volunteer groups that help us with housing and furniture moves and donations and things like that, volunteers. But otherwise, no, there's no religious component in resettlement at all.
it doesn't make it like a barrier or challenge
Yeah.
for us at all.
I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Great, thank you. Any other questions in the room or online? If we can get a microphone back to the online participants as well.
So we have a question. What is it being done to introduce and assist refugee youth to higher educational opportunities?
It's a great question. So what is being done for to introduce refugee youth to higher education opportunities? Jawad, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So there are a variety of different programs, and connecting refugees to higher education opportunities is not a new thing. It has already been happening, relying on older tools like international student visas, or for those who are already in the US to work for refugee resettlement agencies to work one-on-one with the students to help them get connected to opportunities. But there are also new tools and new programs that are being introduced. I know the next presentation is going to talk about Welcome Corps. The next presentation is going to give you more details about this. But basically, the idea of private sponsorship, this new program has a higher education component and envisions a new role for higher education institutions to not just contribute to the migration policy discourse through research or conferences like this, but to also actively be able to respond to displacement emergencies. And I believe this higher education component called Welcome Corps on Campus is gonna make it more affordable to bring in refugee students, especially in a state like Virginia, where it has in-state tuition for refugees upon arrival, and also make it more sustainable by expanding access to federal financial aid resources or other resources that refugee students might have to rely on to become self-sufficient and be able to fund their own education and support themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, right? And we, as Joad mentioned, right, we know that this has been done in the past, right? So the President's Alliance on Higher Education is doing a lot of work on this. There's also a great program called Every Campus a Refuge that is very much focusing on, right, using universities as a welcoming tool already, right? So if you think about, right, when someone arrives to a new country, what do they need, right? They need housing, they need food, they need a job, they might need to learn English, they might need educational opportunities. Those are all things that a university campus has, right? We bring students to universities to provide them all of those things. And so I think there's a great example already, even before the Welcome Corps on Campus initiative, of how universities can be a supportive environment and context for refugee resettlement.
I encourage everybody to look up Every Campus a Refuge. They started that at Guilford College in North Carolina. That was I graduated from there, and I was actually at Church World Service when they started that in the same city. But that is a great example to show how you can pull in, and you probably know very much about it, how you can pull in students who are college age, how they can get the college experience, living on campus, going to classes, making friends, working with teachers, those things. It's a great program.
And Michelle, I'd like to add that even in 1975, I had two family members who were college age. So my uncle and my aunt actually were sponsored by individual families who actually helped them go to college and help them with that transition. So the social worker tried to match families up with individuals who were college age so that they could have the support they needed to attend college. So even in 1975, they were doing that partnership.
That's great. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
I have a bit of a comment that's kind of compliment to what you were just saying, Jawad. It's not just that refugees and immigrants benefit from higher education. It goes the other way around. You know, when you look here at Mason, our faculty, students, staffs, you know, the contributions that refugees and immigrants, we've got a great example up there, you know, what they're doing for the institution really also should be valued. And that's kind of the direction we're going to be moving in the afternoon to talk about that. You know, that it's not we're just helping, but we're being helped by this sort of new blood coming into the United States. And the refugee resettlement process is a way for people beyond the campus to see this value. And that's what I think is most exciting about what you're doing already and ways to expand that. So thank you for that.
What are some, as we get the microphone to Sandeep, I wanted to ask, what are some ways that you all would encourage people to get involved, right? We talked a little bit about community, but what concretely should people who are here or people that we run into, right? What would be your recommendation? Like what would be the most impactful thing someone could do to support refugees who are arriving in the United States?
I would say one of the things, we have a quarterly meeting. It's our quarterly consultation meeting. And we have it with the state refugee coordinator and all of the local resettlement agencies in the area and any other stakeholders that want to participate. And then there are required few stakeholders that are required to show up. I would suggest coming to one of those. I would also suggest if you're interested in going to any of the events that the resettlement offices in this area hold. Sometimes we hold joint events together. Sometimes we hold separate events, but just showing up, bringing your business cards, meeting people, networking is a really great way to get your foot in the door to figure out where the needs are and how you can help.
I would also say volunteering at the different agencies. We're always looking for volunteers, whether it's like right now, we're looking for a volunteer to build a community resource where we have like resources for mental health and housing. So just volunteering your time, and then also employment opportunities. We're always looking for new employers that pay a fair wage. And so if you own a small business, you know, employ refugees. They bring a wealth of knowledge, and so yeah.
Also housing. We often place our clients in apartments and with, you know, big apartment complexes and things like that. We have to think outside of the box for housing. Private landlords, duplexes, even, I hate to say it, but even like renting renting a bedroom in somebody's house, we have to think outside of the box with housing, and that's always a big need for us.
And Airbnb, I know, helped a lot
Yes.
during 2021. They were really great, and we still use private landlords. We still use Airbnb when families first arrive. We place them in temporary housing until we finalize, signing a lease and getting them a permanent house.
And mentorship too.
Mentorship.
Mentorship is great. We're always looking for people to join with our families. Vetted, of course, but join with their families and just, be a friend. Help them learn what life is like here. They can only be in the office so long with us. And, we have hundreds of clients that we're working with on almost a daily basis, but just having a friend who knows the systems in this country, who can teach you how to go places, how to get places, and what to do is worthwhile.
Yeah, my mosque currently, sorry, I just want to go into a little bit more personal. My mosque currently is setting up a settlement group because during the fall of Kabul, they realized that they were getting a lot of Afghans in our mosque. And so now we're actually training volunteers to work with resettlement agencies to help them. And we don't want to duplicate services, but what additional service? I know as a resettlement provider, we're always lacking in providing transportation because case managers have so many clients that we're serving. And so maybe they could take a client to, their health appointment, their medical appointment, or whatever that need may be, providing tutoring to the kids because they don't really know English that well. And so providing ESL support. So that's something to also think about, is within your faith-based community, having those, having community groups like that.
I would say that even if people are not in the field of refugee resettlement, I want to encourage you to look at your organizations or your own individual capacity and explore what you might be able to do to assist refugees. And I really encourage you to learn more about the new private sponsorship program and the opportunities that it might have for you to help refugees. I already know that we've already had faculty members at George Mason who took advantage of the United for Ukraine program to sponsor Ukrainians through humanitarian parole. And again, they just did that as a professor. And yeah, it really, private sponsorship is gonna empower individuals to contribute directly to this field.
Anything to add, Han?
I think also just getting involved within your own community, like in my neighborhood, there are new families, and also even at my children's schools, there are new families. And so I think you can even find out within your own community who you can help.
Great, thank you. Sandeep, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sandeep. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at IIR. So my question is to Kim or Salima, or anyone can take it. So whenever, let's say if you get some refugees from a new country, like from a country where you have never seen a refugee. So what sort of challenges do you face, and do you get like any external support to understand that group and help them?
Yeah, that happens a lot across the country. There's new populations that are resettled all the time. It's about reaching out to the community, finding restaurants. That's the first place I go to when there's a new population that I haven't worked with. I try to find a restaurant that might be from the same country or the same culture at least, to try to get some information, to educate myself. A lot of the times the national agencies will have background information on populations, so we know what's happening in the country back home for them. We get a bio on the families, so we know where they've been, we know what they've been through. But it's really, it's about educating yourself on who the person is or who the family is, where they're coming from. It's about finding the resources within the community. If you can find the resources in the community, your clients are more likely to stay in your community. Because if you have a population you've never resettled and just slap them in the middle of somewhere they don't have nobody to speak to, they're going to get up and go. They will find where their people are. That's just how it works. So it's just learning about what your resources are in the area.
Yeah, and taking advantage of community leaders, that's been really successful. In Texas, we had Burmese families coming in that spoke Chin, and just reaching out to that church community leader, and he was able to communicate with them. So making sure that you're really using those contacts. Community leaders are really powerful.
And like Salima was saying with her mosque, I went to Chicago when I was working for USCRI. I was doing a monitoring in Chicago, and they have a Rohingya center in Chicago. That is wonderful. And it was a need because they saw the population growing. They saw that the resettlement agencies were doing their best, but couldn't provide all of the services that they need. So they put together this lovely agency to help out Rohingya being resettled in Chicago. And I also, we were talking about LGBTI and plus. Heartland Alliance has a really great program for LGBTQ plus clients that I would encourage you also to look at. They're out of Chicago, but I would probably say are the pioneers of resettling LGBTQ plus individuals in the country. And they have a whole booklet and everything. It's just using your resources. It's just finding where your resources are. It's finding where the different pieces to put the puzzle together.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.